Hi everybody, we're going to read The Boy Who Grew Dragons. We're going to read chapter 2. So if you haven't seen the previous chapters, make sure you go watch those first before you watch this one. The chapter is called The Jam Roly Poly of Doom. Is Grandad planning on growing potatoes on your head? Mum asked when I walked into the kitchen. She pointed to my hair. You've got half the garden in there. Shower now and be quick. Tea's nearly done. I groaned, but there was no point arguing. Not when Mum had her I will not be moved even by a runaway rhinoceros look. But I couldn't make it into the shower. And not just because I spotted the latest Spider-Man comic I'd left at the top of the stairs and stopped to check that I hadn't actually missed anything, even though I'd read it 6 times already, but because when I went to my room to grab my dressing gown, I noticed something very odd. The dragon fruit was glowing, properly growing. I went over and peered down at it, reaching out. I prodded the spiky skin. It started pulsing orange, red, and blazing yellow. And then I remembered what Grandad had said about mold. Maybe it was toxic. I yanked my hand back and stared at it, half expecting my fingers to shrivel up and drop off in some fatal reaction. They didn't, and the relief was slightly sprinkled with disappointment, not because I wanted my fingers to fall off, but because if you've read as many comics as me, you can't help but hope that you might just absorb some superpower when this kind of thing happens. Not that this kind of thing ever happened to me, ever. The fruit had stopped pulsing now and now looked pretty normal apart from the glow. Before I could prod it again, I heard Mum shouting from downstairs that tea was ready, and if no one was there to eat it in exactly 30 seconds, she was giving it all to next door's dog, and we could have cereal for all she cared. I might have taken more notice of this if the neighbours actually had a dog, which they don't, just a ferret and a fussy one at that, so I doubt it would eat Mum's lasagna anyway. Dad stuck his head around my door and shouted, Tea's up, Thomas, and then headed down the hall. I waved, Just coming, Dad. I didn't bother telling him. He didn't need to shout. He wouldn't hear me. He wears a pair of massive headphones pretty much permanently. Music is Dad's job and his hobby and what he does every second between those times too. He writes music for commercials on TV. Commercials means TV adverts. And one very low budget film that no one's heard of, let alone seen. But I think secretly he wants to be a rock star and imagines being discovered by some TV talent show or something. Anyway, I've got used to communicating with him mainly through mime. Aware that I hadn't made it anywhere near the shower, I swapped hoodies, then ducked into the bathroom and quickly stuck my head under the tap, looking at the state of the sink after I'd finished. You'd think that we probably were Ah, let's read that sentence again. Looking at the state of the sink after I'd finished, we'd probably be growing potatoes in there too. Meal times are interesting in our house, not because we talk about interesting things or anything like that, but because my not yet 3-year-old sister Lolly, in particular, watching my parents to field the flying trying to field the flying food and make sure some of it at least went into Lily's mouth. Plus, since it's the only time Dad doesn't wear headphones or isn't plugged into his keyboard, Mum seems to feel she has to make the most of it by talking non-stop at about 100 miles per hour. No one could possibly process the amount of information she churns out in between mouthfuls. In fact, I'm pretty sure Dad is actually composing tunes in his head while she's talking, and the nodding Mum takes for his agreement just him keeping time. After Mum wiped up the lasagna and Lolly had generous oh After Mum had wiped up the lasagna that Lolly had generously shared with on the floor, she brought out dessert. She was working her way through a cookbook Nana gave her last Christmas called Great British Puddings. That night it was jolly I can't read today, I'm sorry. That night it was jam, roly poly, and custard. Well, lumps of custard. The roly poly's a bit flat, she noted as she offered it to us unapologetically. It's meant to be a nice spiral of dough and jam, rather than a splodge. She was right. It looked as if someone had sat on it, and it wasn't unusual. Mum is a vet, you see. Although she can wrestle an uncooperative Doberman into a head cone, she can't wrestle pudding ingredients into anything that resembles a cake, despite all the shows she watches on TV. Of course, that could have something to do with her leaving out half of the ingredients to make it healthier. A sugar free cake is not cake in my book. But being bombarded with shows about producing the perfect pudding while at the same time being programmed to make sure everyone eats their 5 a day of fruit and veg makes dessert more difficult for Mum than for the rest of us. I wanted to say something nice to make her feel better, but I'm really not great at lying. Dad was staring out the window, humming under his breath. I needed him to step in quick before I blurted something that would probably end up making Mum hurl the whole dish at the wall, which was not necessarily a bad idea. Just then, Lolly grabbed a piece and stuffed it into her mouth, and then spat it out. Mum looked horrified. We watched as Lolly picked up another piece, unraveled the dough happily, and started licking the jam out of the middle. See, Lolly likes it, I sputtered. Mum didn't look convinced, so I dived for a piece and started making what I hoped were believable yummy noises. Mum sighed and said, "Can't you call her Charlotte for once?" "But she likes being called Lollybob. Don't you lollybobalob?" I replied, still chewing the tasteless lump of dough. Lolly giggled and stuck out two jammy hands at me. "See?" I said, finally managing to swallow the leaden of ball of dessert. It was lodged in my throat, and I had to take an enormous gulp of water to get it down. Mum turned, and while she was wiping Lolly clean, I grabbed the rest of the roly-poly pudding from my bowl and stuffed it in my hoodie pocket. Thanks to my sister, I was going to be saved from eating any more. We stick together, me and Lolly, even without jam. Suddenly, there was a loud thump from upstairs. Mum started staring at the ceiling. "Whatever's that?" It's probably just Tom Tom messing with my stuff," I said. "That cat is like a furry wrecking ball," Mum moaned. "Go and sort out your pet, Thomas. I didn't need telling twice," with half a roly-poly still sitting on the table, staring at me menacingly as I raced up the stairs. "Tom Tom, come out," I said crossly as I stepped into my room. I looked around for the ginger cat, ready to give him his marching orders, but he wasn't anywhere to be seen. Then I noticed the dragon fruit wasn't where I'd left it on the desk. It was on the floor by my bed, and what's more, it had grown. Okay, so that was chapter 2. I hope you guys having a nice week. Talk to you soon. Bye.